Jeremy, you picked up the ball. Nobody was doing anything. There was no real idea of how critical mass was going to come together after COVID and all that, and how many people were willing to do it. So all the old regulars that have always carried the ball for the club were not jumping up to do anything. You know, you didn't want to act like you were taking over, but you did, and it was incredibly to the club's benefit. And so if you would talk a little bit about the process of getting this crazy thing started and what kind of things happened to make it happen, and then what did happen.
Yeah, so great question. So, it actually started about 2 months before, 2 maybe 3 months before. I don't recall the precise timing, but I noticed pretty quickly that there weren't ample planning messages coming out about field day, that the club didn't have any specific plans. And so in the prior year, my very first field day, after getting my general license, it was just me and the family camping, and I didn't have a great showing that year. It was definitely some lessons learned there as well. But I realized, I was like, okay, well, if the club's not going to make any plans, I'm at least going to make sure I book that as a plan. And so we had done a winter field day event at the Granger Lake campsite with the Aries group, and I realized I liked it. It was a great site, great facilities, great resources, great scenery, really quiet from a noise perspective, and RF energy out there. So I booked a site and posted it on Groups.io, and I think there was still a lot of uncertainty. Omicron was still popping up big again around that time. A lot of concern around whether or not anybody was going to feel like doing group events or group activities, I think. That time lapsed about a month or so up to the next meeting, and Glenn asked, hey, we don't have any field day plans. We'd like to see the club do something. Does anybody have a site? And I sat there for a minute thinking about whether or not I really wanted to volunteer a potential intrusion on the family plan, so to speak, right? The wife wasn't there with me at that particular meeting. She sometimes comes. But it was kind of a decision of, do I want to invite the club to something I just committed to the family as a family plan kind of thing? So I kind of texted her on the side. She took a minute to reply, and I was like, you know what? Yeah, so I've got a site. And, I tried very hard not to claim the leadership role.
Yes.
In the beginning, I knew the volume of work that had to be done, and the burden it was potentially going to become, and I just was trying to protect myself from that stress level to the extent possible. But ultimately, it had to get done. And I booked the site originally because I wanted to make sure I participated in field day, and the more I thought about it and realized, we have a lot of new members that maybe have never done a field day, have never had that opportunity yet. They just got their license, have only joined it recently. I wanted them to have that opportunity as well. So, as we got down that path, those were some of the the primary motivators around making sure that things came together, and whether it was booking an additional site just to make sure that the club had a clean place to operate, booking some additional resources. We had some volunteers come in, and then we had a few volunteers fall to the wayside, so we had to hustle in a few areas to make sure that things stayed on track. But ultimately, we made the accommodations happen, and I think we had a really good turning out as a result, a great turnout ultimately from probably 12 to 15 people that we weren't sure, especially in the week leading up to field day, whether or not they were going to make it. We had maybe 12 or 15 people total RSVPing, and then we had at least 3 to 5 people start backing out. And it was starting to look like it was going to be maybe half a dozen of us at best. So we ended up having a lot of great people come out. Ultimately, Mark Novick came out as one of the primary operators. James Anderson came out and made a few contacts as well on both Mark and my stations. Pete Wykowski was out there. He was actually there before we arrived and was instrumental in helping get the initial ops tent set up and my first mast in the air. Mark came out and set up his gear, and we ended up having a great time. Richard Booth came out and set up the information table and did, honestly, an amazing job enduring being out at the information booth, away from the rest of the operations, by himself basically the entire day, except for when he had visitors and passersby that wanted to come and have conversation with him. So that had to have been, he had his radio out there with him, of course, as well, but that was just an amazing job he did, being there for the club and making sure we had that presence and that public facing voice and face. And then several eyeball QSOs that came out to hang out for the day and or enjoy the meal. So I think there was a lot of desire. It was just a question of who could. A lot of people followed best practices around making sure if they knew they had some exposure or some risk, they didn't come. But others that knew they were safe to come did, and it was amazing.
So how many hours did you personally work?
Oh, that's a great question. So not as many as I wish I could have. So, you talk about, Dick is great about preaching the importance of planning capacity and your class and understanding the ramifications of the class you're trying to go for. And we knew right away with two operators, with only Pete and James as alternates occasionally, that we were stretched to try to go 2A. But we also knew 1A would be way too limiting. So we pushed for it, and I ended up getting about 5 hours of sleep. So maybe 19 hours minus 2 or 3 hours of additional fudge factor. We had we had a big stutter step in the beginning where Mark and I, as young operators, get out there with our own rigs, throw up our own antennas, expecting to kick off field day and start making a bunch of contacts. And we don't have, or his radio, his ICOM 7300 didn't have great filtering. My Yaesu FT991 had some filtering, but was stepping all over his radio. So I was running a long wire end fed. He was running a DX Commander, which is essentially a folded fan dipole. And every time I transmitted on either the same band as him or any harmonic of the band he was on, it washed out his entire radio, and he had zero reception. We identified that very quickly, and it was a problem. I ended up picking up my first 5 contacts. I knew my first 5 contacts were intentional for natural power QSOs. And I wanted to make sure I did that because I wasn't sure how long my solar cells or battery was really going to last for me. So I told him, hold on, let me get those done. I knocked those out on FT8 and FT4, and then quickly shut down my gear and transitioned into setting up a 6-meter antenna so I can get to VHF and get away from him on the HF bands and let him operate for a while. So when you look at the chart and the contact progression, you see this really slow start and a time lapse, and then you start to see things take off a little bit finally as we really dug in, found our rhythms, found where we could operate with one another in spite of those challenges. I had a lot of fortune on 6 meters working FT8, and then realized also later in the day that I was actually able to step down to 15 meters, which wasn't completely problematic for Mark as well. So I was able to work those 2 areas while he's worked on the more traditional bands. I think he called it a night at around 1:30 in the morning, and I lasted until about 3:30 in the morning, and then realized I had pretty much exhausted all of the 40 and 80 meter FT8 and FT4 contacts. Once nobody new was showing up and nobody else new was responding to my CQs, I was like, all right, time to get some sleep. He came out after about 3 hours of sleep, I think it was. So he ended up coming out about 5:30, 6:30. And I ended up coming out around 8:30 or so. I got a couple more hours, and we just pushed through the last of the day in the same fashion. And we had, if you look at the statistics, will show that we had about 18 hours of solid operation combined when you look at eliminating 30-minute breaks. And we had about 20 hours and some change combined operations when you eliminate 30-minute breaks. So definitely a lot of lag there, a lot of opportunity for improvement. Some of the lessons learned that I think we take away from that is the importance of scheduling operators, trying to make sure we have shifts to cover the rigs and keep the rigs running for the class that you're going to run. Would definitely make it a better showing next time around. But hats off to Mark. He was our top operator for the day with over 270 contacts. I came in a close second with 260 some, but really appreciate everybody coming out and helping us out, from Richard running the information table to Mark and Pete and James coming out and helping us operate. So even for the eyeball QSOs that came out just to hang out and talk, ended up engaging. Tom and Bob came out, they were hanging out at the picnic table for quite some time, chit-chatting with us, had a great time. And as we kicked things off and started realizing there was a problem and I had to go erect a 6-meter mast, they pitched right in and helped out to get that mast in the air as quickly as we could. It was an antenna that I brought with the intentions of one of our other members who was going to bring a 6-meter, 10-meter rig to work exclusively on 6 meters. And without them being able to make it, it stayed packed to the side. But when I saw we had a problem, of course, we had to pull that out, get it in the air. So Tom and Bob were excellent at stepping up. They came out just to chit chat, but ended up rolling up their sleeves and helping out as well. The whole thing had a very team atmosphere to it. Everybody that showed up to pitch in, showed up to have a good time, showed up in the spirit of field day to see what we could make happen as a group, and it ended up paying off big time.
You guys picked antennas and antenna supports that lent themselves to getting erected safely with very few people. And so hats off. In past we've done things that were much more exotic, but it took a big crew. Mm-hmm. And you didn't have that. You guys did a terrific result. I think everything about it was great. And FT4, FT8 is a wonderful mode for when you do have visitors. So you can talk and not and operate at the same time.
It was great. We even had I brought a monitor out that we had picked up from Goodwill, just to have a low-cost monitor that we could plug in, and we had some a centralized logging server running that we had set up at the not the information table, but at the picnic table underneath the awning for that particular campsite. With the intentions of being able to show things like that, right? Maybe even show some of the FT8 activity coming in, maybe show a map of the contacts we're making as we're making them. Unfortunately, most of that kind of fell apart. It was a little windy that day, and the presentation board was propped up against the monitor at one point, and a big wind gust came along and tossed the monitor to the ground. I was so glad it was only a $25 monitor from Goodwill. Lessons learned once again. But we had a great time. We had and the presentation board. I'll be bringing that to the club meeting. We had this is my second year in a row where even from my very first field day, I started orchestrating my bonus points as creatively as I could to maximize the points with minimum effort. That is to say, we scheduled our educational activity around radiograms, specifically so that the educational activity would feed into our formal message traffic. And so we had a presentation board that talked about the history of Morse code into the telegraph system, into radiograms and their use over the years and into today even, and then had a packet of radiogram forms for individuals to fill out if they wanted to send a radiogram to somebody. Didn't end up having a lot of participation in that particular activity, but we still had, Mark had a few messages that he sent out, I had a few messages that I sent out. So we were able to max that out, and it ended up paying off big time.
Good. Well, thanks so much, Jeremy, for your leadership and your hard work, and for making this come together, and for doing this video today. And I look forward to the next time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Going into the work zone. What is that? Oh, it's a lantern.
It's my little blow-up lanterns. I got a couple of them. They're so weird. Yeah, because they're for backpacking. You can collapse them. They're solar. They have a solar panel on the top.
Got a cut.
Oh wow.
For brakes.
No one uses the cut.
No one, right?
No one uses the cut. I would imply there are brakes.
MREs. Seriously, look.
They don't show my chicklets.